Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Sangeet Choudary with us. Sangeet, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me here. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to have a fun discussion because of your expertise, but let me tell our audience a little bit about you first. You were a founding member of Intuit's business in Asia. You're a contributor to Harvard Business School books. You're a technology analyst, a conference speaker, a startup mentor, and a self-proclaimed platform junkie. Does that all sound about right?
Yeah, more or less.
There
It
you
does.
go. So tell me, you do so much. Recently, what have you spent most of your time doing? What do you currently got going on?
Sure. So I used to run incubations for Intuit out here in Asia, and around that time I got very interested in multi-sided businesses, which connect creators with consumers or buyers with sellers. We think of it as we think of it as content platforms like YouTube, which connect video creators with viewers, or marketplaces like Airbnb or eBay.
Mm-hmm.
So what I realized was that this model was pretty much the business model for the future of the internet, because the internet is about connecting different people together
Mm-hmm.
and business is about connecting supply and demand. So if you can connect supply and demand over the network, that's pretty much the future of what internet businesses are going to be. So I believe that these businesses are going to be more and more pervasive, not just in the startup world, but even traditional industries will have to move towards this model in some way.
Mm.
And so I just wanted to really, understand this model extremely well, because I think this is the model of the future, and that's what I've been doing. And all my activities, whether it's the book that I'm writing, or the speaking that I do, or the tons of advisory work that I do, are all aligned towards understanding how platforms work and helping platform startups and platform businesses to grow.
Yeah,
That's what I've been doing. Yeah.
that's great. At kind of a high level, what's the best way to define a platform if you had to kind of summarize it into something simple?
Sure. A platform is essentially a form of business which connects people who produce something with people who consume that. So if you think of Airbnb, it's people who have rooms and who want to let it out. They're producing something, and then there are travelers who are traveling and they're consuming those rooms, right?
Mm.
In the older model, if you weren't thinking of platforms, you would have to build a hotel, and you would have to build your own rooms to
Mm.
satisfy demand. But with platforms, you don't need to own any of the rooms. You just connect the two sides. So YouTube again is a platform that connects two sides. Twitter is a platform that connects people who tweet something with people who read those tweets. So that's really the easiest way of thinking of platforms. I don't think of the two sides as two different markets,
Mm-hmm.
but as roles that people perform. Because on the internet we can perform any role really. So that's how I
Gotcha.
think of it.
Now that makes a lot of sense. Now with platforms, you've been really drawn to platforms, like you said, in your work currently. You call yourself a platform junkie. You write a blog that I think is called platforms.info. So really, your entire universe kind of revolves around this platform idea. What made you so drawn to it initially? You said earlier that you think it's the future, but initially was that why you were drawn to it, or was there other things?
Well, it was the fact that I myself was building quite a few platforms while I was at Intuit. I built a pretty large platform out in India, connecting farmers with buyers of farm produce, and the impact that it had on the farmers was immense. It led to a 50 to 70% increase in annual income for the farmers, because of the fact that it could uniquely match them with the right buyers.
Hmm.
So I felt that that's where the power of the internet is, in connecting diverse sets of people who need each other. Because traditionally, we've never had this supreme amount of connectivity. So we've always had whatever a business pushes out to us. We go to a store and we buy it. But now we live in a world of choice, and that's why I believe that every industry. I mean, if you think of education, education is not about choice. It's about, there are these certain schools you can go to and just consume whatever is taught over there. But
Mm-hmm.
now we're seeing things like Udemy and Skillshare coming in, with where anybody can teach anything and anybody can learn that. So I see this happening across industries really, and that's really why I'm excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And every industry that has a platform come to it, it gets revolutionized. And I think, like you said, education is just beginning that. And so it's going to be great to see more and more platforms really come in and figure out how to connect the supply and the demand of education. And I'll go for every market that the world has, I think.
Ab-
Software is eating everything. and platform is eating most industries, I think, right?
I agree. I mean that's where that article by Mark Andreessen was one of the reasons that got me into it as well. Software is eating everything, and it's not just because it automates things, but also because of the connectivity.
Yeah.
That's really why it's happening.
Now you mentor a lot of startups, through different channels. When you mentor startups, do you encourage them to try platforms? Because sometimes startups can have a small idea or a simple idea, and to think platforms, you have to think big. You don't start usually thinking about platforms and connecting people with the supply and the demand. You think about a simple thing you can do for the world and turn a buck. Do you encourage them to think big and think platforms?
Well, if you think of it, a lot of startups these days want to be the Airbnb of X or Uber of X.
Hmm.
Now, Airbnb and Uber themselves are platforms fundamentally. So, if you want to build the Airbnb of X, you have to ultimately understand how platforms work, how do you get both sides in together,
Hmm.
and things of that sort. So, very often what I see is, you do. It's ultimately it's fairly simple. You just need to realize that your users are not just consumers, they are also producers. So the way you create features for them, the way you create incentives for them to come on board are different for them as producers and different as consumers. So that's the only fundamental difference that you need to account for.
Hmm.
Apart from that, you need to realize that platforms have very little value without users, because users are creating value. So if you take care of these two factors, building a platform is becomes more manageable. At the same time, uh, it, we always hear this thing: you can have only one Facebook. No matter how many social networks you build, you'll have only one that will have a billion users. So
Hmm.
platforms have this tendency to have some kind of a winner takes all model. So
Hmm.
you need to be careful about what kind of platform you're building, and whether that market is already taken care of, or is there a twist you can do like Instagram competing with Facebook. So you need to think about those aspects. Otherwise, I think startups are really the ones that are changing the world with platforms today. So I do encourage them to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like how you see it because you don't see it as a super difficult task. You just see it as a set of things that need to be in place. You have to think differently, but it's very possible. Just don't compete in a platform that already has a winner because they usually do have a winner take all. So fight about tomorrow's platform, not about yesterday's. So I like how logical and methodical your thinking around platforms really are. Now you have a great resource, a great article that you wrote where you talk about the different approaches to business and you talk about the platform approach in distinction to the stuff approach and the optimization approach. Talk to us about those three: the stuff, the optimization, and then the platform, because I think it'll give us a sense of the movement toward platforms in the world.
Sure. So, so traditionally, the way business has worked is just you create something, you push it out, and people consume it,
Hmm.
right? And if you think of news, traditionally journalists would create the news, they would push it out, and then users would read it,
Hmm.
right? Readers would read it. The optimization approach is essentially what happened in the first wave of the internet, the Web 1.0 era, as we call it,
Hmm.
right? Which was, there's a lot of stuff that's been created, but so far we've just been getting all of that pushed at us. Now let's pull it. So that's what Google did. There's a lot of news out there, but you go to Google and you figure out exactly what you want to read, and you put a query based on that,
Hmm.
and it serves you the right results. Now, the platform approach is essentially what Twitter does. It says that forget the journalists, everybody's a journalist.
Okay.
So everybody now can create stuff. So that's the platform approach. So if you think of another example, if you think of the traveler accommodation problem, hotels had a stuff approach. You want to serve more travelers, you build more rooms.
Hmm.
Priceline came in, hotels.com came in, and they said, we'll do the optimization approach. We'll get all the hotels together and we'll help you figure out the best hotel based on that. So we'll optimize it. But then Airbnb comes in and says, forget hotels, anybody can run a hotel now.
Uh-huh.
So that's the platform. So that's the transition, of how software is eating the world, first by optimization and then by platforms.
Gotcha.
That's how I see it.
So it started out we had things to sell, and that was kind of the
Yeah.
very beginning. And then we optimized how we got the things to the people. They could Google search for it. They could find it more efficiently. We could find our buyers. Now the idea of a maker and a buyer have been merged, and we have platforms. Everyone's a creator, everyone's a consumer, and the platforms make even better connections than Google can because it's all there in real time at once. So is that kind of the movement through it?
Precisely. I mean, you just nailed it with that. That's exactly what it's about.
Yeah, it's exciting because that's a very
Yeah.
different model for the world. And like you said earlier, we've never had these super connected computers at all ever in the history of mankind. So
Yeah.
essentially it's the first time that platforms are possible at scale, which is incredibly exciting. I mean, I can't wait to see what it's going to do in the next 10, 20 years because it's going to turn everything on its head, I think. Now,
That's
growth.
why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Growth Hacker TV is all about growth. I mean, that's our angle on things. So let's talk about how to grow a platform because I know you actually have a lot of expertise in this, and you've already mentioned a little bit of it. You know, as we've talked here, the chicken and egg problem, some of those things, and you actually have the skill set of overcoming some of the difficulties associated with the platform. So first, tell us though, what are the fundamental building blocks of a platform, of growing a platform? How do you begin thinking about it? You know, at stage one.
Sure. So a platform is interesting because when you start, typically the platform has zero value. If you think of Twitter, it's just a place where you can write 140 characters. It's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely useless. So so there's a problem that at zero users there's absolutely no value. For the first user does not find any value. So till there's a critical mass of users, the users who come in do not see any value in using the platform. So till you hit that critical mass, you cannot just rely on setting up a funnel and optimizing that funnel, because it's not just about getting traffic and converting them. It's not like an airline ticketing website at all. So the first challenge is, how do you bring in users when there's no value, or how do you bring in the consumers when there are no producers? How do you bring in the sellers when there are no buyers, and then vice versa? How do you bring in buyers when there are no sellers? So that's a challenge that we see across platforms, and I'd love to talk about how that translates into how those things can be solved, because that's what this show is about,
Yeah.
right? The second challenge that platforms have is, you're getting all of these people onto the platform. As you grow, you need to ensure that you connect the right people to each other, so that there's no noise, because it's like getting a lot of people into a room and then there's just going to be a crowd over there.
Okay.
So you need to use data extremely carefully to decide, okay, this is a person who's worth listening to, this is a person who's not worth listening to. So you need curation of the users, the users who are creating stuff, and you need curation of the content that they are creating. So of all the videos on YouTube, this is the video that you should be watching. That's what YouTube should be able to do. So these are the two growth challenges that a platform has. First, starting off, and then second, maintaining that level of signal over the noise.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's talk about both of those a little bit and how we kind of overcome those. So the first one is, having supply when there's no demand, having demand when there's no supply. You know, when there's no consumers and no producers, you have nothing but a Twitter that's able to produce 140 characters, but is completely useless. So how do you? Which side do you attack first? How do you think about it? How do you get either side? Walk us through the process, as granular as you can to kind of, show us how one of these things are built.
Fantastic. This is the interesting part, because I write a lot about this on my blog, but let me condense that for 3 minutes of good package
There you
advice
go.
on this. Right. So think of it this way: you have a platform, you have producers and consumers. So you have a demand side and a supply side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the way to solve the chicken and egg problem is to create some incentive so that one side can come on board and stay long enough so that you can bring in the other side using this first side as an incentive,
Okay.
right? So let's take an example. Um, let's uh, let's uh, let's take the example of Reddit. When Reddit started, uh, I mean, it had a chicken and egg problem. Nobody was posting any links, so nobody was upvoting anything. So Reddit just did a lot of faking. They just wrote a few simple bots which started putting up links over there and started upvoting and downvoting those links. So pretty soon you had these thousands of fake users who were using Reddit. So that now when you got a real user, he felt that there was actual activity happening over there.
Okay.
This was the way to get supply in first, right? PayPal in a similar way did something very similar. PayPal also wrote bots which would purchase stuff on eBay, and then it would insist on paying by PayPal, and by that the demand was created for PayPal, right? So that's how
Ah.
PayPal solved that problem. Now let's take a slightly different example. Let's think of how you can leverage existing platforms to grow. So think of Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
What Airbnb did was you had to get hosts and you had to get travelers, but you, you were starting with nothing. So what Airbnb did was that it used Craigslist, which already had both these parties, and then it started allowing users from Airbnb to cross post to Craigslist, so that if I'm a host on Airbnb, my listing gets posted to Craigslist. The demand side from Craigslist comes to Airbnb. Alternately, Airbnb went after the hosts on Craigslist and said, "Why don't you start posting stuff on Airbnb?" So they got the supply that way.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of cross pollination with an existing platform works really well for platforms.
Yeah.
Um, another uh, another thing that we see very often is that because platforms have zero value at zero users, a way to solve that is to create something which has some value even for the single user. So have some single user value.
Okay.
So if you, Instagram, people think of Instagram as this photo taking app, but Instagram is really a social network. That's why it's so threatening, right? And that's why Facebook bought it for $1 billion. But to start the social network, Instagram started with something that had single user value, which was just an app.
Mm-hmm.
And in the course of using the app, I, as the producer, could share my thing on Facebook and then get consumers onto Instagram, ironically using Facebook to grow Instagram,
Yeah.
right? So that's another thing that we see very often platforms. Yet another model that we see often is that for platforms to grow very fast, you initial users to all be interested in each other, right? So if you're getting people who are selling, toys, you want the buyers also to be people who are looking to buy toys.
Mm-hmm.
So focusing on a niche is extremely important, and that's one of the reasons Facebook did so well, because it focused on Harvard initially, then it
Right.
focused on the various Ivy League schools, and then this connected all of them together. That's something we see with local commerce platforms as well, like Foursquare, just focusing on New York and then gradually spilling over to other cities.
Yeah.
So these are some of the broad models that are used. You decide either the supply or the demand. One of these you're going to start. You get the other side. If you think of one last model that I'll share is, if you think of Skillshare, since I'm involved with them as an advisor, if you think of Skillshare, you essentially you just target one side, which is you just target the teachers initially, and you tell the teachers, "Hey, we're giving you stuff to run your class. You get the students for us." And then when the students come, some of them become teachers. Eventbrite again works the same way. So
Mm-hmm.
that's another model of solving the chicken and egg problem. So there are many of these different models. These are some of the common patterns that we see.
Yeah, no, that's such great advice that you just gave us. I want to walk through little pieces of it, just to make sure everybody's clear on what was said. One of the things you mentioned, what I heard at least, was that when you're growing a platform, there's different stages. And the stage that Reddit is at now, you can't just begin there. You have to do things that you don't plan on doing long term to actually get things going. So if you're PayPal, you don't plan long term on robots buying things on eBay. If you're Reddit, you don't plan long term on having bots upvote and downvote things. But
Yeah.
if you think you can skip that stage, you'll never get to the place where you get to ignore the bots doing things. So you have to
Absolutely.
get really creative and hustle a lot and understand the stage you're in for being a platform. And you also talked about leveraging other platforms as kind of the second thing. Other platforms, that's the thing about platforms is because they're so super connected, they're perfect to kind of cipher off users from other people. They're so super connected, and the connections are so loose and not hierarchical that you can actually go into an existing platform and take large amounts of users if you're super creative about it, but then you're also probably going to be able to be disrupted the same way, so you have to think about that, as well. You also mentioned having a single player mode, making sure that there's an experience that doesn't have to have a group to make sense until you have the group. And then you talked about focusing on a niche, kind of like what Facebook did. And so I think all of those, bits of advice are just incredible for growing a platform and the things we should all keep in mind. Now, let me ask you this. What's some of the biggest mistakes that you see startups make? Because you see startups that you mentor, they're building platforms, you give them your advice, they go off and do what they think is right, but they're not. So what are the mistakes you see?
I think the biggest mistake is it doesn't seem obvious, but very often startups try to grow platforms the way they would grow non-platforms, the stuff businesses, right? So they just decide that, okay, I'm going to spend some money on SEM. and I'm going to do some content marketing, and I'm just going to get this traffic. And then they look at those traffic spikes, and it doesn't really matter because they've not solved the chicken and egg problem. So you have a huge drop off, and that's one of the most common problems that I see. That until you solve the chicken and egg problem, none of these optimizations matter. Till you solve the chicken and egg problem, as you mentioned, it's all about hustle. You just got to get a lot of people somehow together and get them to interact. And it's not about looking at Google Analytics and seeing where people are dropping off and not. It's extremely different from that. So that's one challenge that I see very often. The other mistake I see very often is that right in the beginning, the startup does not focus on quality. So if you think of a dating website, if you just have a lot of men coming there and just creating a mess that none of the ladies want to come in. So that's a problem that happens across platforms. If you want to open out, if you want to create the next YouTube and you don't have a lot of high quality videos, you're not going to get good consumer interest at all. So focus on quality right from day one is very important. And I think the platforms that have done really well have got this focus right. If you look at LinkedIn, it focused on Silicon Valley in the beginning, really high quality connections. If you look at Koda, it focused on very good content right from the beginning. So quality focus extremely important.
So ignore funnels initially and focus on quality content. And I think I read on your blog last night, you talk about how people want to focus on acquisition funnels like the R funnel, acquisition, activation, retention, referral, revenue, the popular Dave McClure funnel, and that's great. But when you're building a platform, until you figure out the supply and the demand, there's nothing you can really do with the funnel, and that's when you have to get do the Reddit or the PayPal kind of hack to make things work. It's not really about moving them through to the point of purchase. It's just a different mindset, and I can imagine it's hard to change gears into platforms if you've never been around them. If you've only been in other kinds of businesses, it's probably hard to change gears and force yourself to think that a platform uses new kinds of connections to do new kinds of things, and other models just don't apply as well as we wish they would.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now let me ask you this. What are some examples of companies that just do a great job with growing a platform? I mean, we know about some that you've already mentioned, Airbnb and, those kind of things. What are some other ones that you always point to as great case studies on how to do this well?
Well, okay. Some of the ones that have done it really well, I think Facebook is an obvious example, but they really got a lot of things right all through, and they did that really well. I would say Uber has done it really well on a city by city basis. They have less of a chicken and egg problem because the supply side is heavily curated by them. They decide which limousines come in and all of that, so they can get one side on board first. But they've done a really good job of growing a platform. I mean, Airbnb is a fantastic example. Any day, YouTube is a fantastic example. Again, any day. Apart from that, Flickr did a really good job early on. Flickr was one of the first content platforms out there on the web, and they did a really good job by integrating with the blogosphere and getting the bloggers on board initially. So these are some of the examples. Square is a great example, actually. If you think of Square is trying to create a platform layer on top of the credit cards. But it started with the single user model. It just said, okay, I'm just targeting the merchants first, and you don't even need the consumers to be on Square. And then later on, they said, okay, now that we have consumers, they come onto Square. So these are all interesting case studies of doing this right.
Yeah, no, that's great. Until you just mentioned Square, I never thought about Square as a platform, and it just shows you how exciting this new world is, where credit card merchants can become platforms for buyers and sellers that aren't necessarily businesses to actually go and give money back and forth. So platforms is just there's so many things that are left to be done with platforms still. Now you also teach about virality. You mentioned you're an advisor to Skillshare, and you also have an upcoming class on Skillshare. And the class is around the growth canvas. And the growth canvas is about designing virality for a product. So that fits in perfect with the audience that's watching Growth Hacker TV. So first, we've heard about, the lean canvas, the business model canvas. There's all these canvases that are out there. But I've never seen a growth canvas, which is really exciting to me. So, what gave you the idea to create a growth canvas? And for the people watching, I'll have this on the screen as you talk here. But what gave you the idea for this?
Well, you know, a problem that I often see while approaching growth in general is that we try to package everything into hacks and then we try to apply it across startups, whether it applies or not. And we often learn in retrospect that it doesn't apply like that. So so that's a challenge that I've seen with virality as well. We've tried to figure out these invite loops and then we try to focus that okay, it's just about optimizing K and that's it.
Okay.
But if you think of it, virality is actually not just a hack, it's part of the user experience because it's something that a user does on your product because of which someone who is not on your product comes onto your product. So it's actually a conversation happening between two people that is facilitated by your workflow, right? So I feel that in this whole focus on K and this whole focus on optimization, we're kind of losing the basics of virality, which is there's a sender, there's a recipient. The sender, while using the product, is spreading the word about it, and the recipient is taking some action and coming back. So how can we make this a good experience? So it's a design approach to growth rather than an Excel approach to growth, if I could put it that way,
Yeah.
right? And if you think of what I have kind of tried to build with the growth canvas, it's essentially if you think of a sender and a recipient talking to each other, how can you minimize the friction that is there for this whole cycle to work? So you minimize it from a design perspective rather than saying, okay, if we send more invites, the K is going to go up this way because sending more invites may not be a good experience for the user.
Okay.
So that's really why I've kind of looked at it from a spatial perspective. This is how the growth should look.
Yeah, and that's why I was excited when I saw it because I've had people on the show before talk about the viral loops that they used, and that's exciting to talk about. And there's things to learn from that. They talk about the user signs up and then they email a friend and then we send the friend this, but nobody's ever really taken it one step higher and said, okay, philosophically at the canvas level, what's going on? What values being exchanged? And I love the way you kind of boil it down, which is there's a sender and there's a recipient. And all that's happening is the sender is sending something to the recipient, and you're facilitating that, like you said, in the workflow of the product. So that's kind of the simplest and easiest way to think about virality. But all of a sudden, a lot of things become very clear when it goes beyond, oh, viral, let's just have an email invitation loop. Oh, viral, let's just have a social network integration. That might be the answer, but you didn't get there through working through the actual questions that would make that the answer. So this canvas allows us to really get to the end result intelligently and not just imitate someone else's approach to virality. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to take you through the canvas of how it works.
Do that. Take us through it, and we'll have it up on the screen. And the canvas, I'm not sure how you move through it when you teach it, so I'm just going to let you kind of move through it the way you think is best. I don't know if you start with the sender or the how or the recipient, but you go ahead and walk us through the canvas here.
Okay, sure. So you have the canvas in front of you, but think of the actual process that's happening. There's a sender on your product, so this guy is using your product, and you want him to do something, which is send something out, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the challenge that happens with virality is a user comes to your product for a certain reason. The act of sending something out should be aligned with that reason. Because the problem with gaming, for example, is the user is there to play a game, he's not there to send invites, right? So you need to see what can you get the user to do that is actually a part of using the product itself. So if you think of, so this is again where the platform thinking helps, because if you divide your users into producers and consumers, and if you focus on producers, then if the producer is creating something, it's in the interest of the producer to send it out of the product. Mm-hmm. So if you think of Kickstarter, I'm creating a project on Kickstarter. If I want to get it funded, I'm going to send it out. And the moment I send it out, people are going to come to know about it. So people are going to come to know about Kickstarter, even though I never invited anybody to Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. So the invitation is no longer about sending an email invitation or the Facebook integration. The invitation becomes a part of using the product itself. Okay. If you think of YouTube, I put a video on YouTube. The next thing I want to do is tell the world about it. So I go to Facebook, I go to my blog, I set up the video over there. So these are all ways. So I kind of try to figure out what is the motivation for the sender, and that's the first block. The why. Why will the sender do what you want him to do? Okay. So there are three motivations that I boil it down to. typically there are three motivations, and these are the three F's if for easy reference. Fun, that I'm here for a certain reason, and if I spread the word, I get more fun out of it. Like I took a picture with Instagram, I share it on Facebook, I get more fun out of it. The other is fame. So I put this video on YouTube. If I share it, I get more fame out of it. And the final thing, which we would not usually want to go to, but sometimes have to, is fortune. If you cannot deliver fun or fame to the user, you have to give him some money to get the stuff out, right? So essentially, motivations boil down to these three factors, and you need to see how you can, get the user involved in the fun and fame part itself, and get the stuff out. The second part is what exactly is going out of the product. Usually, we think it's an invite, right? We think that we just send an invite out and we get somebody back in. But here's the problem with invites: we just get so many of them that we don't like it, right? So the way to get people to know about your product is to send a part of your product out there. And the best part of the product to send out there is actually what is created on the product. So think of what your product is and what users are creating on it. If it's YouTube, it's a video. If it's Instagram, it's a photo. If it's Kickstarter, it's a project. The thing that users are creating on it is something that can be sent out and can travel on an external network, right? And over there, it can get retweeted, it can get reshared, and more and more people can see it. But it's a part of your product, and it's acting as a demonstration of what your product is about. It's not just a dumb invite, right? So that's the sender side. Now on the recipient side, the sender took something and he sent it out on an external network. Now this is where we normally think, hey, it's a Facebook integration, but for different products, different kind of integrations might be useful. Right? If you're creating a survey on SurveyMonkey, you may not want to share that with your Facebook friends. You may want to use email to send the survey to certain people. If you're using Etsy, you might want to share your product on Pinterest, not on any other, because Etsy is all about visuals. So you need to see what is that external network which complements what I'm building over here. If you think of YouTube, right? When YouTube started, there was no Facebook around. So, or rather, Facebook wasn't big enough at any point early on. So, what YouTube did was it allowed integration with MySpace, where you already had these bands and their fan bases. So, the bands suddenly had a way to put up their video over there, and that became their viral channel. It was no longer about invites; it was about finding a good external network. So, that's the where part of it. What's an external network that aligns with the platform that we have? Finally, when you are on the external network, there's this question of why will the user take an action?
The recipient.
So, yes, the recipient. Why will the recipient take an action? So, if you just, you just see this whole list of gaming notifications on Facebook, it's not something that I want to take an action on. So there are typically two reasons I feel users take actions. One is that what is shared on the network clearly shows what the original product is about. So, a video of YouTube, if it is put on Facebook, it shows that, okay, YouTube is a place where you go to see more videos, right? So it shows that this is what that original platform is about. Secondly, there should be a clear call to action, that this is exactly what you need to do. Very often, we fail to put a call to action. We just think that getting the word out is enough. So that's where you can play on to why the recipient will take action. So these are the four design elements of growth, if I could put it that way. And then there's the optimization elements, which we already focus on a lot. But do you want me to pause before I get to the optimization?
No, I think that's great. I mean, basically, just to make sure we're clear here, you have the sender side and the recipient side. And with both the sender and the recipient, you have to ask the question, why? Why should the sender send it? And why does the recipient want it? And those are things you really walked us through, because we can't just think, oh, they want our product to succeed. They don't. They don't care. So we have to give them some actual motivation that they care about. And then on the sender side, you're thinking about, okay, what do they send? And then on the recipient side, where do they receive it? And so we have to be, we have to choose those things carefully, choose the right platform that makes sense for the product, and send the kind of thing to that network that shows off the product. And so it really makes a lot of sense. If you ask the why for both sides, put out content that's relevant on a network that's relevant, then really you can start using the how engine to grow virally. So let's talk about the how engine, the middle chunk there. Walk us through kind of the mechanics of that.
Sure. So the how is pretty much what we do when we think of viral loops. But the problem is we forget the other four questions and directly jump to how very often.
Exactly.
So, right? So, how is essentially, if you think of this sender, how can we those things that he sends out? So that could involve two things. And this is where this becomes interesting, because we usually have this dichotomy that should I focus on growth or should I focus on engagement? But if you focus on the design, the more often you engage a creator on your product to create something, the more often you are likely to have him send something out. So engagement and growth suddenly become linked, right? If you answer the question on Coda, it allows you to send it to Twitter as well to share your answer. Now that's a place where engagement and growth are getting linked together. And so the first thing is how can I increase the number of sends? Two ways to do that: either just keep bugging a user to send something more often, or just say, hey buddy, why don't you create something, and now that you've created something, send it out there. So
Okay.
that makes it more organic for the user. The second thing is, how do you allow it to spread more on the network, right? Because now it's outside your product. It's outside. It's not on your domain. It's not. The video is not. The user is not at YouTube.com. The user is on Facebook. So what YouTube does is, the moment the video finishes, the it shows the user 9 other videos out there. And the interesting thing is, the user may not have wanted to share the video that he saw, but one of those other 9 videos, he might want to share that with his friends, right? The user on the external network. And so there are these various different ways of how you can increase the ability for something to spread externally. Finally, the third part is, how do you convert, which is having a really crisp call to action and keep testing different call to actions. Very often we ignore this part because we focus entirely on the top of the funnel. How can we get more stuff out? But the call to action is very important. And the final part is, when the user clicks, how can you minimize the number of steps between that click and him creating something on your platform? So either creating or sharing something from there. So so essentially that's it. How can you minimize the number of clicks to the next send? And if you think of all of this, right? None of this is, in principle, none of this is really new. It's just that it's a new structure of putting things together. Back in the 90s, when we used to have these chain mails, forward this to 100 people or you will die in the next 7 days. That's about all of this. There's a motivation over there. There's a clear call to action. There's a clear reason for spread. I mean, everything is. I mean, that really is the perfect example of something going viral. Those chain spam mails,
Yeah.
right?
One of the things I love about how you're thinking about it is that the best way to get somebody to share something is not to just beg them, but have them become a creator. And there's something about it, once you've actually taken part in the act of creating, then it's a part of you, and you want to share yourself. You want to talk about the thing you were a part of. So I love that little insight there. But yeah, you're right. It all comes full circle. What we were doing in the 90s with those mail, things, it's all the same now. We're just refined it a little bit, and we figured out how to make money with it. But it's still the same stuff. No, that's great. Now, when it comes to virality, let me ask you the same thing I asked you about platforms. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see startups make as they think about virality? And I think I know what you'll say based on what you've already said, but go ahead and tell us, though.
Sure. Okay. I recently actually wrote about this as well, and it went. Ironically, that post went really viral
Of
because
course it would.
so couple of things. The first thing, I mean, I'm not going to harp too much about this because we discussed this, but it's that virality is a user experience, because you are making users take actions. So if you believe that design is important, you need to design virality as well. You don't just optimize viral loops. So that's the first part. The second part that I feel is very important is that very often we don't understand the difference between virality and word of mouth. Word of mouth is something that happens when I like a product so much that I want to tell other people about it. And it's not something that happens only in the internet world. It happens offline as well. I love this toothpaste. I want to tell people about it, whatever. Virality is very different. Virality is whether I like your product or not. I may hate your product, but while using the product, it's in my best interest to share something that gets people back to the product.
Okay.
So I never go around telling people that, hey, Instagram is so cool. Why don't you download it? I just share the picture, and people know that I'm a crappy photographer. They see the picture and they know, hey, there's something about Instagram that makes him a good photographer. And so that's virality. It has nothing to do with delivering delight. It is just about creating workflows where people can share something from the product. So that's a common mistake that I see, is that startups think that they have designed virality, but what they've actually done is they are hoping for word of mouth. They believe that their product is so good, they're hoping for word of mouth. Now, word of mouth is something you cannot guarantee, right? Because it's not in your control. But virality is something you can design for. You can see, okay, in the workflow, this is where you have the right motivation for somebody to send something out. So that's a common, again, a really common mistake that I see. So just want
Yeah,
to share that. Yeah.
I love that distinction. I mean, that you're helping me in my thinking as you're talking about the difference in word of mouth and virality. I'm realizing that I'm not quite thinking about some of these things accurately because you can design virality. You've said that word a few times, and I think that's the right word. You know, we're not talking about the UX, we're not talking about the UI, we're talking about designing, engineering virality by understanding these pieces and how they come together. And when you design virality, you know, like you said, it's in their best interest to share it, even if they're not going to share it by word of mouth. They may never tell someone to download Instagram, but they are telling people inadvertently because it's in their interest, you know, how the platform works. So I think that's awesome insight right there. You know, Sangeet, this has been such a great interview. Let me ask you one last question here, and it's a high-level question that I end just about every interview with. But what's the best advice that you can give to any startup that's trying to grow?
Okay. Yeah. It's an easy one
Easy
for
one,
me
right?
because yeah, because I give this all the time. So okay. So the best advice is, don't focus on signups, don't focus on app downloads. All those are useless metrics. The only metric that you should be focusing on is pretty simple. If you can explain why a user uses your product in one sentence, just look at the number of users who are doing exactly that. So if you're building a marketplace, the reason it should be used is for transactions. So nothing else matters. Number of transactions matter. Active use does not matter. People keep saying DAU by MAU for Airbnb. It doesn't really matter. It's just about transactions. Active use matters if you're creating a product where you want people to spend more time. So Pinterest, Facebook, DAU by MAU matters. So focus on what people need to do over there and just see how many people are doing that. And everything else is really a vanity metric. So this is something I see startups struggling very often with, but there's a very simple thing. I mean, if you think of if you think of something like Uber, for example, all their marketing is focused not on people downloading Uber, but it's focused on people entering a credit card number into Uber, because that is an example of somebody who's going to at some point use Uber to buy something, to book a cab ride. So focus on what that action is, which predicts that the user is going to keep using you for what you are. So
Yeah.
that's really the
That's incredible advice. I love that. It allows metrics and analytics to actually seem simple and human because we all know the one thing that actually matters, and yet we come up with all these metrics to just cloud our vision and confuse everyone, confuse ourselves. At the end of the day, every product has one metric that truly matters, and just focusing on that could lead to so many great breakthroughs. Sangeet, this is an awesome interview. I'm so glad that you came on the show, and I'm going to watch this one over myself just to learn from it again. So thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Loved it.